When 309-pound undrafted rookie Jayden Loving collapsed the pocket and made full contact with $200 million franchise quarterback Caleb Williams during a non-contact drill, the entire Halas Hall practice field went dead silent. Head coach Ben Johnson immediately halted practice, while general manager Ryan Poles personally stepped in to issue an unprecedented directive explicitly banning Loving from full contact finishes in the A-gap. But this emergency restriction wasn't a disciplinary punishment for a rogue rookie. It was the terrified realization that Chicago's starting interior offensive line couldn't stop a 4.7 two-speed athletic anomaly. Highly paid veteran guards were getting blown past in one-on-ones, sparking friction in the locker room and forcing defensive coordinator Dennis Allen to rethink his entire trench rotation. Here is how an unheralded defensive tackle forced the front office to rewrite their practice rules, and why his banned playing style proved Chicago accidentally stumbled upon an unblockable monster. The heat inside the humid confines of Chicago's summer training facility was already suffocating, but the sudden heavy stillness that followed the collision felt far more oppressive. Padded practice environments in late August are always a delicate dancing act of controlled aggression, governed by a universally understood unwritten rule. Defensive players are allowed to shoot gaps, demonstrate burst, and collapse the pocket to prove their value to the coaching staff, but under no circumstances does anyone lay a finger on the face of the franchise. That sacred rule is double hot when applied to a former number 1 overall pick carrying the sky-high expectations of an entire city on his shoulders. Caleb Williams stood behind the line of scrimmage in his signature red jersey, the literal universal football signifier for hands-off, strictly untouchable, and off-limits to contact. Yet, as the whistle blew for a standard 9-on-7 run-pass simulation drill, the unwritten rule vanished beneath the raw instincts of an unheralded rookie fighting for his athletic life. Jayden Loving was not supposed to be in the backfield that quickly. On paper, the rep was designed to test interior zone tracking and allow the offensive line to build chemistry in their pass protection sets. Instead, Loving fired off the snap with violent precision, effortlessly slanting through the guard center gap before the starting offensive line could even set their anchors. The penetration was so immediate and explosive that Loving's momentum carried him entirely past the point of no return. Rather than pulling his hips back or veering off to swipe at the air, the standard courtesy practiced by seasoned veterans who value team harmony, the undrafted rookie closed the distance in a blur of motion. He crashed straight into the chest of Williams as the quarterback stepped up to deliver a throw downfield. The impact sent a sickening, hollow thud ringing out across the practice turf. Williams stumbled backward, losing his footing on the turf before landing hard on his side, his helmet popping off slightly upon impact. For 2 agonizing seconds, no one moved. The offensive linemen stood frozen in complete disbelief, staring down at the sprawling body of their franchise quarterback. The coaching staff on the sideline froze mid-stride, clipboards hovering in the air. The sheer panic was palpable. Millions of dollars, years of strategic rebuilding, and the team's entire immediate competitive future had just been flashed before their eyes by an unheralded kid trying to make a 90-man roster. Head coach Ben Johnson didn't just blow his whistle, he screamed into the muggy afternoon air, sprinting toward the center of the field while frantically waving both hands to halt the session entirely. The sharp, piercing sound of the whistle echoed off the metal framing of the indoor facility, instantly killing whatever tempo the offense had been trying to build. Players immediately rushed into a tense, huddled perimeter around the falling point of contact, with several veteran offensive linemen shoving Loving back by his shoulder pads, screaming furiously in his face for stepping way over the line. Loving stood in the middle of the storm, breathing heavily through his mouthguard, visibly stunned by the chaos he had just unleashed with a single burst of effort. Williams slowly sat up, shaking his head and adjusting his arm pads while trainers rushed onto the field to check his wrists and collarbone. The quarterback waved off the medical staff with an annoyed gesture, getting back to his feet, but the damage to the session's protocol was already done. Ben Johnson stormed past the offensive huddle, his face flushed red, grabbing Loving by the collar of his practice jersey and pulling him toward the sideline while the rest of the roster watched on in stunned silence. A line had been crossed, a red jersey had been violently compromised, and a high-stakes ripple effect was about to tear through the front office, the coaching staff, and the entire depth charts. To understand how an undrafted rookie could single-handedly derail an entire practice set and send a panic wave through Halas Hall, one has to examine the physical anomaly that is Jayden Loving. On paper, interior defensive linemen weighing over 300 pounds are expected to be space eaters, plodding, heavy-footed anchors whose primary function in modern football systems is to swallow up double teams, clog running lanes, and allow linebackers to shoot gaps cleanly. They are built for walling off the line of scrimmage, not for lightning-fast acceleration into the backfield. Loving, however, shatters every single established physical archetype for the position. Standing 6'2" and weighing in at a dense, muscle-bound 309 pounds, he possesses the frame of a traditional nose tackle paired with the terrifying explosive movement capabilities of an elite edge rusher. The true horror for opposing offensive lines lies in his raw, verifiably absurd athletic metrics. During his pre-draft evaluation process, Loving recorded a jaw-dropping 4.72-second 40-yard dash, a speed profile that instantly placed him in the upper echelon of all defensive line testing historically. When plugged into Kentley Platt's Relative Athletic Score (RAS) metric, a standardized formula that measures a prospect's physical testing against every player at their position since 1987, Loving scored a staggering 9.92 out of a perfect 10.0. That near-perfect score wasn't built on raw top-end speed alone. It was anchored by a lightning-quick 10-yard split that allows him to cover the first 3 yards past the line of scrimmage before an offensive lineman can even process the snap of the football. He moves with a violent fluidity that defies basic physics, exploding off the ball with a low center of gravity that turns his 309-pound frame into a flying mass of momentum. In non-tackling, controlled practice periods like the 9-on-7 drill, this athletic profile creates an almost unmanageable dynamic for offensive play callers and line coaches. Modern interior offensive linemen are trained to rely on quick hand placement, establishing a strong firm anchor, and using the natural leverage of a pocket to absorb a pass rusher's initial bull rush. But against Loving's rare first-step explosion, traditional blocking techniques simply break down. Before an interior guard can shoot his hands to strike or set his base, Loving has already penetrated the A-gap, using a brutal combination of raw lateral quickness and an unyielding upper body swim move to turn the guard's shoulders completely parallel to the sidelines. He does not just defeat blocks, he bypasses the entire engagement zone entirely, turning standard pass protection sets into immediate track meets in the backfield. Because training camp non-contact drills rely on offensive linemen using partial effort technique to prevent catastrophic leg injuries in the trenches, Loving's full-throttle, uncalibrated play style fundamentally breaks the drill. Where veteran defensive tackles learn to throttle down their burst once they win the initial leverage battle, allowing the play to run its full course for the sake of the offensive installation, Loving plays as if every single snap is his final chance to survive in the league. His body simply does not feature a passive setting. When he fires out of his stance, his 4.72 speed propels him forward with out-of-control momentum. During the infamous red jersey incident, the starting center tried to execute a standard reach block, but Loving reacted so quickly to the snap count that he was already through the guard center seam before the center's second foot hit the turf. Once a 309-pound athlete carrying that much velocity penetrates the backfield, he cannot simply hit the brakes on a dime. The physics of his sheer mass and speed guarantee a collision course, transforming what was supposed to be a routine scripted practice rep into an explosive, unscripted threat to anyone standing behind the center. Following the high-tension collision in the pocket, the fallout was immediate, extending far beyond a routine coaching lecture on practice etiquette. General Manager Ryan Poles and Defensive Coordinator Dennis Allen stepped into the facility's executive office to resolve an unprecedented operational issue. The front office was faced with a stark reality. They had a 309-pound defensive tackle possessing elite 4.72 speed, but his natural playing style posed a direct risk to the team's $200 million quarterback, Caleb Williams. Allowing Loving to hit the A-gap at full throttle during non-contact team drills was no longer viable from a risk management perspective. Poles and Allen established a strict, unprecedented rule specifically for Loving. Moving forward, whenever he lined up in the interior during team scrimmages, he was under explicit orders to pull back his rush or completely avoid full contact finishes when shooting through the interior gaps. If he breached the guard center seam, he was required to pull up short and navigate around the quarterback rather than driving through the pocket. For a raw, undrafted rookie battling for a spot on the 53-man roster, this restriction created an impossible dilemma. The coaching staff was asking Loving to suppress the exact trait, his relentless, explosive motor that made him effective in the first place. Defensive linemen in training camp survive on tangibles like sack production, pressures, and disruptive plays that show up on film during evening evaluations. By forcing Loving to throttle down his rush at the precise moment of penetration, the coaching staff effectively stripped away his primary tool for winning reps. If he followed the directive, his tape might reflect a lack of finish, giving rival scouts and evaluators the impression that he was easing up. If he ignored the mandate and brought down Williams again, he risked being cut for insubordination. This policy update sparked an intense debate within the coaching staff. Dennis Allen recognized that Loving's raw athletic profile could give the defense a unique interior pass rush element. However, Ben Johnson's primary objective remained the health and development of the starting offense. The central question became how to fairly evaluate a disruptor when his full-effort playstyle was deemed too dangerous for scrimmage settings. The front office had to determine whether Loving was an undisciplined liability who couldn't operate within structured practice boundaries or an elite physical talent whose natural instincts were simply too dominant for standard camp rules to contain. The enforcement of the front office's new mandate did nothing to quell the growing tension inside Halas Hall. If anything, it accelerated a subtle war of attrition across the entire roster. While Jayden Loving was now legally forced to pull back his finishes around Caleb Williams, the damage to the offensive line's ego was already done. During isolated one-on-one trench drills where the quarterback was absent and pure physical violence was still fully permitted, Loving continued to dismantle Chicago's interior offensive line. Highly paid veteran guards and veteran centers, earning tens of millions of dollars to guarantee a clean pocket for the young star quarterback, were repeatedly getting exposed by an undrafted rookie. Loving's lightning 4.72 first step burst left, starting guards clutching at air, their footwork compromised and their chests open to devastating lateral counter moves that sent them tumbling back into the dirt. The locker room dynamic quickly shifted from playful training camp banter to an uncomfortable simmering friction. Veteran leaders on the offensive side of the ball began to view Loving not as a scrappy rookie trying to earn his stripes, but as an existential threat to the team's hierarchy. Whispers circulated through the cafeteria and film rooms as offensive linemen bristled at film study sessions, where line coaches repeatedly paused tape to highlight Loving out executing multi-million-dollar starters. For the veterans, losing a rep to a premier draft pick was palatable. Losing reps consistently to an unheralded, undrafted physical anomaly was an insult that threatened contract leverage and starter status. Some veterans openly complained to the coaching staff, arguing that Loving's reckless, full-throttle approach in practice was breaking the unwritten rules of team cohesion and risking unnecessary wear and tear before the regular season even kicked off. On the defensive side of the ball, however, the mood was entirely different. Veteran defensive linemen saw Loving's raw, unstoppable talent as a missing piece that could elevate the entire front seven. Defensive coordinator Dennis Allen watched the tape not with frustration, but with tactical inspiration. He recognized that while Loving couldn't be allowed to play unchained during standard 11-on-11 scrimmage sets against Williams, hiding that level of game-breaking athletic disruption on the practice field was a waste of resources. Rather than trying to force a square peg into a round hole by making Loving a traditional early down run stuffer, Allen began quietly crafting a specialized role designed to unleash his physical tools without compromising team safety. Allen initiated a complete tactical overhaul of the team's third down package, scheming Loving into custom interior blitz and stunt configurations. The defensive coordinator aligned Loving in the A-gap directly adjacent to elite edge rusher Montez Sweat and rising defensive end Austin Booker, creating an overload front that forced offensive lines into impossible pass protection choices. By pairing Loving's 309-pound frame and 4.72 speed with Sweat's length and power on the exterior, Allen created a lethal stunt game. In these packages, Loving served as the primary penetrator, using his explosive first step to flush out two interior blockers and pick off the guard, opening wide-open lane paths for Booker and Sweat to loop around into the backfield. This tactical adjustment reshuffled the entire defensive rotation. Established rotational veterans saw their high-leverage third down snaps swallowed up by the undrafted newcomer. Loving was no longer just a training camp curiosity who had accidentally hit the franchise quarterback. He was becoming the engine of the defense's most aggressive pass-rushing sub-package. Every afternoon walkthrough transformed into an intense chess match as the offensive line scrambled to adjust their call sheets to identify where Loving was lining up before the snap. The red jersey ban, intended to protect the offense, had inadvertently forced Dennis Allen to unleash a terrifying third down nightmare that changed the balance of power inside the trenches forever. When the preseason slate finally kicked off, all controlled mandates, artificial restrictions, and red jerseys were stripped away, exposing Jayden Loving to live game action for the very first time. In full contact conditions against opposing teams who had no knowledge of his training camp reputation, the 309-pound undrafted rookie turned the exhibition opener into a personal showcase. On his very first defensive snap in the second quarter, Loving lined up in the A-gap, exploded off the ball with his trademark 4.72 speed, and drove the starting center directly into the visiting quarterback's lap before the play could even develop. He recorded 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, and a forced fumble in just 2 quarters of play, treating opposing interior linemen with the same violent irrepressibility that had paralyzed Halas Hall weeks earlier. The live game production completely changed the narrative surrounding his volatile camp performance. What had initially seemed like an out-of-control safety risk during controlled practices was now recognized as game-breaking disruptiveness against elite competition. National analysts and scouts re-watching the preseason tape were stunned by his rare combination of interior mass and twitchy edge rusher agility, instantly declaring him the biggest undrafted steal of the entire summer. The front office realized that their initial panic during the red jersey incident was not caused by a dangerous rookie making a mistake, but by an unblockable athlete whose natural speed was simply too explosive for friendly practice settings to handle. In retrospect, the emergency directive issued by Ryan Poles and Dennis Allen was never a disciplinary punishment or a sign of distrust. It was the ultimate, undeniable confirmation that the Chicago Bears had discovered an interior pass rush monster capable of collapsing NFL pockets at will. By forcing Loving to pull back around Caleb Williams during camp, the coaching staff hadn't suppressed his talent. They had merely protected their own multi-million-dollar assets from a defensive lineman no one on the roster could consistently block. As the regular season approached, Loving transitioned from an unheralded tryout player to a foundational weapon in Chicago's pass rush rotation, proving that sometimes the most dangerous players are the ones you have to ban from practice just to keep your own team safe.